All right, so we're going to get started here. Here, why don't we do this? So you know you're in the right place, you know you're at the right workshop. So this is financial aid and managing college costs. I am Matt Beagle Bourgault. Most people call me Beagle. It's a nickname I've had for a long time. And we're going to talk today about the most fun part of higher education, which is the paying for it part. So my guess is that some of you, whether you're in the room, online, you have some question or concern about paying for college, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Most people can't just write a check to pay for it, it's very expensive. So there's a variety of ways that people come up with the means to pay for college. That's what we're here to talk about today. If you have questions, if you're online, there are a couple folks who are there to answer questions. So if any really big questions come up, just let me know so we can share them with people in the room. If you have a question in the room, let us know. Just raise your hand. I'll give you the mic because we want to make sure people online and in the room can hear you. All right. Okay, so before we talk about the actual dollars part of paying, one thing that we've realized at VSAC over the years is that it's really important to kind of have some kind of planning or communication ahead of time. Because what you want, as you can see on the slide up here, is matching a variety of things. So you don't want to have a student expecting one thing, a parent expecting another thing, and then when it comes time to actually make decisions, there's a mismatch. So communicating ahead of time is really helpful. What we advise is that you have conversations at the beginning, as early as you can, and along the way, so it's really clear who is going to be doing the applying to get in, who is going to be working on financial aid application, who is going to write the check at the end of the day, is there a limit to how much a family can pay so that students don't think it's just as much as possible. So having those conversations ahead of time can be really helpful. And the other piece is the research part of it. There are ways to find out about the cost of various schools, so it can be helpful to find that out ahead of time. In the last workshop that was in this room talking about planning for college, one of the pieces of just figuring out where you might want to go is the cost. So it's important to do your research ahead of time to find out, does this school make sense for us as a family financially? So that's one piece. So trying to have all those things match so you can find some good college matches can be helpful. All right, so you may have heard that college is really expensive. In fact, I just said it. So this chart gives us kind of a sense of the cost of college that you might have heard about. If you go to a school's website and you look up how much does it cost to attend this school, you can see the most expensive schools right now are about $80,000 a year. Now that's including everything. That's your tuition, your room and board, all the costs associated. That's a lot of money. And if you multiply that out by 4 years, that's not even assuming a price increase every year, which tends to happen. That's over $300,000. That is a lot of money to pay for education. Now, you can look at other schools as well. University of Vermont, where we are in this room right now, it's still pretty expensive. That's even if you are a student in Vermont, even more expensive if you're out of state. You do the math here, looking at, how much does it cost for the full degree that you hope to get, and it's a lot of money. So even a 2-year program, Community College of Vermont only offers 2-year degrees, you're still talking $27,000 as it stands today for if you were to pay the full price. However, this is the number you really want to think about, the net price. So the net price for attending college is this equation here. It's the cost of attendance minus what, or gift aid that you receive. That is going to determine what you actually need to pay. So some definitions here. One, the cost of attendance. That is the full price of attending an institution. So that's tuition. That's number one. Tuition is simply what does it cost to be a student at this institution. Now for some schools like Community College of Vermont, that's per credit. So it depends on how many classes you take and that your cost is going to be higher if you take more classes. At some institutions, they'll say, well, as long as you're a full-time student, you take 12 credits or 15 or 18, it's one price. So you can take more credits and get more value for your money, hypothetically, but that's tuition. What does it cost to be a student? Then there's room and board. So a room, if you're living on campus, you have to pay for that. Board is meals, so if you're eating in the dining hall, you'd have to pay for that. Even if you're a student who's living off campus, obviously you have rent, you still have to pay for food, so there's an allowance for that, and that's included in the cost of attendance. And then there might be other fees that are specific to a particular program, a lab fee. For a nursing student, there might be a fee. You add up all of those things, that's your cost of attendance. Gift aid is money that you receive to help pay for school as a student, and you do not have to pay that back. So we're going to talk about grants and scholarships and what those are, but that's the gift aid. You don't have to pay it back. You do that math, that's what you need to come up with. So here, if we look at this, it's a little bit different. So this net price that's listed for the same schools that were on that first slide is the average price that people actually pay to attend this school. Now this is everybody going. So realize that, you look at that $80,000 school, some people will pay the full price. Their family does not have financial need, and they're going to pay the full price. Other families have a lot of financial need, and they will pay less than this average price. Hence, we get the average. But you can see that you look at the sticker price, it's not always the same as what you actually are going to pay. And we'll talk into details how you can get an estimate for yourself. But even UVM, the average price that families pay is significantly less than what it is if you just look on the website and say, what does this cost? So again, average net price, significantly lower than the sticker price. And now this is gonna vary school to school. These are just some examples. So how do you find out? This site, College Scorecard, can give you a sense of, well, it can give you a sense of a lot of things. There's a lot of information on the site, just so you know. You can find out how many students attend or are female, how many graduate students, what's the crime rate, lots of good information on here. One of the things that's most helpful for our context here is you can find out an estimate of the net price at a school. You can do that in two ways. One is they will give you the cost and the average net price, just like we saw, for any particular school. So you type in a particular school in here, it will pull that up. It will also give you an estimate based on your family's income. So for example, if your family's income is between $0 and $30,000, it'll say, here's the net price for families whose income is in that price range, $30,000 to $50,000. Here's the net price for those families. So if you have a sense of what your own family income is, you can go in there and say like, oh, typical net prices around here. Now that's not perfect, but it can give you a sense. Student attends this institution, okay, that's a reasonable amount. I think we can swing that. If we borrow some, we might be able to make that work. You can get an idea of the kind of aid that a school offers by looking at that versus, just having no idea, like maybe we'll get some aid, maybe we won't. So it's a great starting point because it can give you a sense. The other thing that this site does is it gives you links to net price calculators. So a net price calculator is something that is on every school's website. So schools are required to have this. With the net price calculator, what you do is you plug in your own information. So they're gonna ask you questions like, how many people are in your family? Or how many people are living in your household? And what is your average, your annual income? It's gonna ask you for that. It might ask things like students' SAT scores or grades, because there's some aid that's based on that. So you plug in all this information and it will give you an estimate of aid at that school for your circumstances. So that's what the net price calculator is. You can find it easily on this site. If you search for a school, there's a link, or you could just go to any college's website, find their financial aid page, and there's gonna be a net price calculator on there somewhere. So in terms of that very first slide, when we talk about the research part, this can be very helpful, because if you wanna get an idea of how much a school might cost, it's a great place to go. Again, it's not gonna be perfect, but it'll give you an idea. All right, key information here. The family has a responsibility for paying for higher education. So when colleges are looking at how much is it going to cost for the students, who is paying for this, they are making the assumption it's not just the student. Doesn't matter if the student's 18 or even 21. They're going to assume the family is paying for this together. So hence, what that means is parents and students will have to provide their financial information about assets, other kinds of things, to determine any type of financial aid. So they're making that assumption. It's not students on their own, it's families. All right, so let's just talk about different types of financial aid. So when we talk about financial aid, it's basically like there's a variety of funds that are out there offered by a variety of sources that can help students pay for school. One of the big ones, and this is the best one, is a grant. So a grant is money that is gifted to a student. It goes to the institution to pay part of that total cost and does not have to be paid back. That's great. So grants typically are based on financial need. Now these could come from the federal government, they could come from the state of Vermont, they could come from the college itself, but most of the time it's based on your family's financial situation. Do you have some kind of need? Might be a little need, might be a lot of need based on the formula, but if you're eligible, you can get a grant, doesn't have to be paid back. Scholarship is similar. It is money gifted to a student, it does not have to be paid back. But scholarships can be based on a variety of things. So where grants are typically need-based, scholarships might be based on things like athletics or academics or performing arts or any variety of things. So that scholarships, what they're based on is kind of up to whoever has the money. But again, if a student is eligible, they don't have to pay it back. So that's a good thing. Work study is a kind of funds that comes from the federal government. So students are awarded this through their college, and typically all it means is that they get a job on campus, they work, they get paid a wage, and they can use that to pay for some of the cost of education. Now the thing about work study is that it's earned by the student. They get a check just like a real job, but they don't have to use it to like go to the bill. So you get a bill that you have to pay for it, but every school's assuming that there are other expenses out there that students have. Because ongoing, you're gonna wanna like probably buy some shampoo maybe, you have to do laundry. There's gonna be costs that come along as a student is in school. Typically that's the kind of thing that work study will pay for. Now students can use it to like turn around and make an agreement and say like, as I earn this, I'm gonna like send this to the business office at the school to pay for my tuition, say, but they don't have to. All right, and then finally there's loans. This is the fun one. So again, basic idea of a loan is that you get some money, you use it to pay for education, you have to pay it back. Now, there are a variety of loans that are designed for education. Often that means payments are not required while a student is in school. Maybe there's no interest while a student is in school. Sometimes they're given to the student directly. Sometimes they're given to parents. So there are a variety of loans. I'll tell you more about that. But this is kind of like the order you want to go in. You want to get grants first, then scholarships. You don't have to pay those back. Work study's great if students are eligible and they can work. And then loans as kind of like, they're a great option for a lot of families. Sometimes they're necessary, but it's obviously the last one you want to go to because you have to pay it back. All right, so how do you get these funds? So there's several ways to access this financial aid that we're talking about here. Now, I mentioned that some of these grants, say, can come from a variety of sources. Financial aid can come from all of those sources. Federal government, state government, the institutions themselves, and then there's also private sources of funding that might be out there too. So in order to access these, the first thing you want to do is the FAFSA. So the free application for federal student aid. So you may have heard of this. Maybe you even filled one out yourself for yourself or another child. This is the starting point for any financial aid. This form is the form that is the application for any federal funds, for federal grants, for loans, for work study, but it's not just the application for those things. Because if you want to apply for a state grant in Vermont, you have to fill out the FAFSA. It's a very short application because a lot of the information comes from the FAFSA. When you fill out the FAFSA, that information goes to every school you indicate. So typically students are gonna fill it out and say, oh, I'm gonna apply to UVM and St. Mike's, I'm gonna apply to Boston University and Quinnipiac and whatever. They list all of those schools get the FAFSA information. Those schools then will use that as a starting point for their own money. So if schools have their own money to give out, they're gonna start with this information. Do you have some financial need? That's what they start with. So you really wanna fill out the FAFSA, even if you're only gonna get loans. All right, the next one is a Vermont grant application. So Vermont has a grant program. It's based on need. So students can fill this out, just a few questions. a couple of financial questions aside from what's on the FAFSA, and they can apply for a state grant. Then there might be college financial aid forms. So what happens is schools will get the FAFSA information, and they'll look at that and say, this is great. However, they may have their own money, and they say, the FAFSA information is helpful, but in order to give out our own money, we need more information. And so they might have their own form that says, please give us more information on top of what is provided on the FAFSA. So one example of that is the CSS profile. So this is a form that multiple colleges use. It's very helpful because you only have to fill it out one time and go to multiple schools rather than a separate one for each school. Not every college requires this. Not every school uses this at all. But if a school says, please fill out the CSS profile, you want to do it, because that is an indication they do have more money to give out. And if you want access to some of those funds, you need to fill out the CSS profile. So that's a good one. Sometimes schools just have their own. They don't want to use something like the profile. Maybe they just have a couple of questions. So it's one thing to find out. Any school a student's applying to, are there additional forms for that school in particular? And then, of course, there's scholarship applications. If students want scholarships, those are often separate. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then loan applications on top of that. All right. So to start with all this, like I said, the FAFSA is kind of the starting point. In order to fill out the FAFSA, you have to create an account. So that's what this is about. This FSA ID is your account to fill out the FAFSA. Now, because this is a federal site and it's so secure, they ask for a lot of information, and there are multiple steps along the way. Now, what that means is it is very secure. When you provide all this financial information, you can feel confident that it's secure. But it can take a while. So what we tell people is, if you want to fill out the FAFSA, don't wait till that day to get an account. Sometimes it's called the FSA ID, or sometimes it's just called an FSA account, Federal Student Aid Account. And well, they're changing the language for some reason, but there we are. So you might hear both. But because this can take a while, it's worth doing ahead of time. If you have ever filled out the FAFSA, well, if you've done it in any time recently and you already created one of these, you don't have to do another one. So if you're a parent, say, you did it for yourself a few years ago, you had another sibling who was applying and you had to create one, you've already got one, you're good. Students also need to get one of these. So it's typically students have to get one, at least one parent has to get one, sometimes both parents, but something you can do now. So because it can take a little while, it takes a while to process, you know, juniors can do this now, or once senior year starts, it's a good thing to kind of get done early because then you don't have to go back and do it. For a variety of things here, there's two-factor authentication and so on. If you want to fill out the FAFSA, you have to have this, and it's worth hanging on to. It actually is helpful later on because so let's just say a student gets some student loans. Well after they graduate, they can look up the status of those student loans, for example, so that can be helpful there. All right, so the FAFSA. You can do this, hopefully, as of October 1st. So you may have heard that this year the FAFSA has been a little different. They're doing these updates to the FAFSA, and it wasn't available on October 1st, and there have been some delays. But lucky for you, any of the changes, hopefully the kinks will be worked out. It's going to be smooth and perfect for next year. All right, so this form is required. It's available October 1st. Make sure you do the right version. Anytime you go into the FAFSA, there's going to be one for the current school year and one for the next school year. So because it's available October 1st, student, family goes in to fill it out, they'll see one available for right now and one for next year. You want to fill it out for the year you will be attending. Deadlines are key to check because there isn't a FAFSA deadline. You can fill out the FAFSA anytime it's available. However, various colleges are going to tell you, please fill out the FAFSA by this date in order for us to process your information. Because remember, that information gets sent to the college. They use it to determine your aid. So you just want to make sure you do it by the deadline. If a school says, you know, our admissions deadline is one date, the financial aid deadline is another date, meet that financial aid deadline or you might miss out on funds. Sometimes they are very early, sometimes they're very late. Every school can be a little different. It's worth checking. So not only do you need to know your deadline for applying, but you need to know that deadline for applying for financial aid as well. Sometimes it's February 15th, March 1st. It really can vary. Another thing about the FAFSA is you can make some changes. So October 1st is pretty early. So a student may not be applying to college right then because the deadline's not till March 1st to apply for admission, but you can go in and fill out the FAFSA, get it done, and then realize, oh, I listed 5 schools and I want to add 3 more because I'm going to apply to these other schools as well. Student can go in, make changes so that that information gets sent to those schools. I decide I'm not going to apply to that school anymore. You can take it off. So you can change that. You can change some other things. You move. Oh, great. You just go in, change your address. So it's not like a tax return where like you get it done, you submit it, that's it. You can make some changes to the FAFSA later on. So it's worth doing early because you know you can go in. If you need to update something, you can do that. Key thing about the FAFSA is it requires financial information, but the beautiful thing about the changes, oh look, this is about changes here, is the FAFSA now will always pull in information about your tax return. So if you filed a tax return, it's going to pull it in there. So you don't have to like find your tax return and plug everything in, you know, and maybe make a mistake. It's just going to pull it right from the IRS. So that's part of the simplification process. It's much quicker and simpler when it works well. So just so you know, the changes to the FAFSA as of this year just means that it doesn't ask as many questions as it used to. In terms of what you need to report, again, if you've done this in the past, you'll see a difference. If you've never done it, well, you don't need to worry about it. It'll be your first time doing it, right? That FSA ID you have to have ahead of time because it has to be fully processed and in the system before you can do it, so you don't want to wait till the day before. And then there's this one other term, the EFC and the SAI, lots of acronyms in financial aid like FAFSA. So this number, when you filled out the FAFSA, you used to generate this thing called the expected family contribution. That's now being changed to the student aid index. I'll get into that a little bit more. So again, right now, it's been a little bumpy in terms of the FAFSA rolling out, but everything should be good. So by October 1st next year, when it comes time to like actually have the new form, it should be simpler, it should be quicker. So for most families, it should be a pretty easy process. Okay, the SAI, we just want to mention this because the student aid index is what gets pumped out after you fill out the FAFSA. You fill it out and it gives you this number. It's like, well, what the heck does this mean? What this is an index. It's kind of like the starting point to determine if a student is eligible for certain types of aid. So the federal Pell Grant, for example, is a grant and it's determined by the SAI. So it's based mostly on a family's financial need. And so if your SAI is within a certain range, you're eligible for a Pell Grant. If it's beyond that, you're not going to be eligible. So that's where that number comes from. So just so you know some of this vocabulary, this is based on a bunch of things. So it's based on your income, based on family size. They use this calculation like, does your income just meet the federal poverty level or not? Which may mean, okay, great, you're eligible. You don't have to answer a bunch of other questions. And then your assets as well. So just a little bit more about what this means. Your income is from kind of like 2 years before. So if a student is a junior, that means they will graduate, oh, I have this right, 2025. They will be attending school in 2025, often. So because it's the 2025 FAFSA, it's going to ask for 2023 income information. Now, the reason for that is you fill it out in October. The last year you had full tax information was 2023. So it's the full year, you know it's done. So it's kind of a little bit backed up. That's the income they're asking for on the FAFSA, and you do have to do it every year. So it's like the next year will be the next year's income and so on. And then assets, what they're asking for there is, do you have anything aside from retirement accounts and the home you live in? So any kind of like money you have saved, investments, anything like that, that's what the assets mean. But the biggest thing that most families have is either a home or a retirement account. Those are not included in the FAFSA calculation. And then the age of the older parent. So there is a sort of a calculation that goes in there because if parents are much older, it's kind of like, well, you should be saving more for retirement. You have fewer years to work potentially before you retire. So that's a factor as well to determine this SAI index. It's probably more than you want to know, right? Okay, so the next form to fill out is a Vermont grant. So the FAFSA is a starting point. That's going to determine aid for a lot of different things. And then this grant application is, if you're in Vermont, you want to fill this out. You have a question? Here, let me give you the microphone.
The FAFSA doesn't ask you for your debt. So when they go and ask you just for your income, how do they calculate that based on your debt? Because you may have excess debt like your mortgage and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, good question. So is debt factored into the FAFSA? It is not. Now, part of the reason for that is that it's trying to be equal for everybody, or at least equitable in some way. And so the idea is some families may make choices that means they have a lot of debt. Some families may make other choices. It's just not a factor. It's based on income, assets, and that's it. That said, some schools, like on that CSS profile form or another form, they may say, for our own funds, we do want to factor that in. We do want to have some idea of debt. So on some of the FAFSA, some schools will ask for that. So, all right, so the Vermont grant is a simple application. If you are a Vermont resident, especially if you're a student applying for the first time, fill out the Vermont grant application. If you think, we're not going to be eligible for that, why bother? It will take you 10 minutes. It's really not a big application. It's worth doing at least the first time. The other thing is, just like with the FAFSA, even if you think I may not be eligible for this, it's worth the first time filling it out. But also what happens is sometimes situations change. Parent loses their job partway through the year. The FAFSA is already done. The grant application is already done if you've done it early, and then you have a situation that means your finances change later. So it's all worth doing, especially now, because it really does not take a lot of time to do both of these applications. But the grant application, again, it's open October 1st, so you could sit down and do the FAFSA, the grant application on the same day. Any Vermont resident can apply. Again, make sure you fill out the right one, because there's the current year and the next year. If you want to get it, you have to fill out the application. What you may find is that you apply for financial aid, you fill out the FAFSA, college form, whatever, and they say, hey, we're going to give you a Vermont grant, but you never actually applied for it. So a school like UVM or St. Mike's or Champlain, they're in Vermont. They are going to assume if you are a Vermont resident, you are going to apply for the Vermont grant, and they'll put that on your award. They're assuming you're going to get something based on their own calculations, and they'll include it in there. But then you never applied, and you don't actually get it. So if you want that grant, you got to fill it out. May sound like obvious, but you got to, fill out the application to get the funds. Oh, good question. So does this grant apply to out-of-state schools? Look, I think we're going to, there it is right there. So yes, you can take it with you. So Vermont is one of the few states where students can apply for a state grant. It's based on the student and family information, and the assumption is students make the choice about where to go, and you can take the grant with you out of state. Now, there is a bit of an allowance, so if you go to a school in state, you might be eligible for slightly more funds if you're eligible for a grant, but for the most part, students can, if they're eligible for a grant, they can take it to an institution outside of Vermont, even in Canada, because there's some schools in Canada, especially for Vermonters, that just make more sense. So, good question. And the other thing about this is, it's an online form. If we need more information from you, sometimes we do. FAFSA information provides so much. The grant application provides so much, where it's just like, well, it looks like your parents are not together. Can you provide information on this other parent? That kind of thing. You can just upload information right into the grant application. It's very simple. Okay, in order to do this, you need to buy a VSAC account. So just like with the FAFSA, you have to create an account. This is something you can do now too. Student can create a MyVSAC account. As a reminder, one thing that's helpful to think about this whole process is that, yes, it's the family's responsibility, but the colleges are still looking at it as the students' applications. So the FAFSA is the students with parent information on it. Same thing with the grant. The student should create the MyVSAC account, and the student should have the application, even if there's some parent information in there. That's kind of the way colleges are going to be looking at it. Okay, so 2 big forms to do. How can you maximize what you might get for aid? So these are just a few tips. One is to do well in school, because what we've been talking about here a lot is need-based aid. So the FAFSA and the Vermont grant are based on need, but the schools often have funding that's available based on what we call merit. So merit is anything that's not need-based. Could be academics, could be test scores, it could be other factors like athletics or so on. So they might have some funding that is available to you for other reasons, but academics are a big one. So just doing well in school, there's some schools even like, you go to their website and it's kind of like, if you're applying and you have a 3.5, you will get this scholarship. You have a 3.0, you will get this scholarship. They're really clear about it, and others are sort of fuzzy. So it's often what happens is students apply and they're like, hey, you got this great scholarship just because they met some criteria that the school is looking for. Often it's academic. So that's one. The other piece that schools will look for is for students who are challenging themselves. So this kind of helps in two ways. If schools are seeing that you did well and you also took more advanced classes, then that can sometimes help in terms of getting aid. And it also means like the better a student does, the more schools they potentially can get into, which means they have more options in terms of the funding. So that's just another way to think of it. School and community involvement can help because there are often scholarships that are based on community service, for example. So that can be something that's important for students to be thinking about. And then finally, this one, well, research scholarships that apply for them, sort of mentioned that already, but this one's kind of key. This communicates special circumstances. So you fill out the FAFSA, it goes to the school, and it's like, well, this is great, but this is 2023 income. In 2024, I retired. I wasn't working as a parent. Any number of things. Oh, we have these big medical expenses that aren't accounted for on the FAFSA. If you have circumstances like that, you want to tell the school because they're not going to know unless you tell them. So it's like, well, our income from 2023 said we can probably afford more than we can because now we don't have as much income. So that's a really good example of when you want to tell the school. Your financial circumstances have changed based on what you've reported to them. Tell them. Ask for special consideration for your circumstances. They're often going to ask you to write it down and provide receipts, but you want to be able to let them know because you just might be eligible for more aid and it makes it more affordable at a given school. So anything happens, let schools know, and let VSAC know in terms of the state grant.
Beagle. Stacy's asking me to just correct that other household parent income is not asked for in the Vermont grant.
Oh, excellent. So if you didn't hear that in the room, so in the Vermont grant, if your parents are not together, that other parent's income is not asked for any longer. Right. Excellent. My mistake. Okay. So other ways to think about kind of maximizing what you can afford for schools. So when we're talking about ways to reduce cost, one of them is obviously to look farther afield. Sometimes schools are really looking to broaden who attends, and so just by being from Vermont, like they might say, oh, now we can say we have students from every state. So they're going to really try to give you some incentive to go. I mean, North Dakota doesn't have a lot of Vermonters. So maybe you apply there and they're like, oh, we'll give you some money to attend our school because we want to be able to have this diverse applicant pool and to say we have students from a wide geographic region. But also just sometimes schools might cost less if they're farther away. Sometimes people make the assumption, well, if I go to school in state, it will be less expensive. That is not always the case. So sometimes you can go to a school that is out of state and it costs less. Even public institutions sometimes, they'll give some big incentive, or private institutions just might have a lot of money, and so they'll provide more money. So it's worth looking more broadly. Don't assume staying close to home will be less expensive. It may, but it may not. Dual enrollment is a program, if you don't know about it, where high school students can take a couple of college classes for free. So if you're a junior and you haven't taken advantage of this, this is something you could potentially do this summer or next year. You can take up to 2 college classes and you don't have to pay for it. So if you haven't done that, I would say talk to your school counselor. Early college is where students are taking a full year of college credit and they also get high school credit for it. So if you're a high school junior, it's not too late to apply for that. Students are looking into that now. It's not for everybody, but just know it is an option, because if you were to say do dual enrollment and you do that through CCV, maybe even take online classes, you have lots of flexibility, you get a whole year of credit that you don't have to pay for. And you're carrying that forward. So now it's potentially a whole year less of school that you have to pay for. So it's a really good deal. Couple other ones on here. So advanced placement, or AP. So if you're a junior, I'm guessing, if you're a high school student, you know about AP classes. If your school offers them, typically they're more advanced classes. There is a test you can take. If you do well enough on the test, some schools will actually give you college credit for those scores. So if you score a 3 or a 4 or a 5 on the test, then the college will say, great, you took this French AP class, you don't have to take this first year foreign language requirement. So you can test out, have fewer classes to take, potentially shorten the time you're in school, save some money. And then this NEBI thing, isn't that a fun acronym? This is the New England Board of Higher Education. So this was mentioned in another workshop previously. This program says if a program is not offered at a public institution in your state, but it is somewhere else in New England, you can get a discounted tuition. So marine biology is a good example. You can't do that in Vermont. There's no school that offers that, but you can go to University of Rhode Island, get that discounted rate, because they do offer that program. So if you Google them and go to their website, you can just see a list of programs and schools, what is offered. So it's worth considering schools if you have a particular major. There's really a lot on there. It's worth checking out. Okay, so 2 more. Think about commuting. So it's not necessarily what everyone wants to do, but that room and board charge can be significant. You know, if you can live at home and travel back and forth to school, do online classes, sometimes it can save a lot of money. And then service is another possibility. So military service is a way to pay for some or all of your education, depending on what you do and what the program is. But there's things like AmeriCorps as well. So sometimes service programs have bonuses or incentives that can help you pay for school. So it's another thing for thinking about for some students. All right, what are we doing here? Okay, so one way to think about just overall paying for school is you've got these 3 buckets. So you have your past income. This is what you already have. You've saved some money. You put it in a college savings plan. You already have this. Maybe a grandparent has saved some money. Anything you already have is one way, obviously, you can pay for school. Now, if you have something like a college savings plan, no school is going to say, oh, you have to use all of this for your first year. You can decide what you do with that. But if you have any kind of savings, it's worth just thinking about, like, well, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to use it all right away? We're going to spread it out. What makes the most sense? One thing to think about just in terms of that college savings plan is that in Vermont, there is a tax credit. So I've seen families who are kind of like, yeah, it's too late for me. We never set that up. We didn't do it. If you think you're going to be able to save anything to pay for future higher education expenses, it may be worth getting a savings plan, just because, like, you have to spend the money anyway, and rather than put it into like just a regular savings account, you put it in this and you get a tax credit on top of it. So if you have any potential savings, it might be worth doing this even if you haven't done it yet. It's not too late. All right, the next one's present income. So obviously this is what students are earning, parents are earning right now that you're going to use to pay for school. So the first one up here, this payment plan, what that is a student's accepted and they have a balance and they say, oh, you have to pay $10,000. That's what's remaining. And you're like, well, we can't write a check for $10,000. We'd rather not get a loan. They say, oh, well, you can pay $1,000 a month over the next 10 months and pay it off. There may be a fee for that. Sometimes it's small, though. So like if you're going to pay interest on $10,000, that's a lot. But if you can afford to make those payments from your savings or earnings, whatever, over time, then you don't have to pay that interest. You just pay the fee, and it can save you money. Schools will sometimes do this for your balance, whatever's left over, maybe too much, and you say, well, we have to borrow money. But sometimes they'll say you could do for part of your balance. So you think about what can you afford per month. Well, we can afford this amount every month to pay, and the rest of it maybe we'll borrow. So if you have a balance, it's really worth thinking about because it can definitely save you money. And then there's some tax credits. So if you're paying tuition, the next year you file your taxes, you can get a credit. If you have any interest that you've paid on federal loans, federal student loans, you can get a tax credit for that. So it doesn't help you immediately, but in subsequent years potentially can help you. And then obviously scholarships are worth looking at for students as well. And then future income, of course, we're looking at loans. Just be aware that students can get some loans, parents can get some loans. There are federal loans and there are private loans. So there are a variety of different types of loans. Regardless, all of them are kind of set up for students attending school. So if you're going to borrow, you just have to do your homework in terms of what makes the most sense for you as a family. Okay. All right, so some things to think about just with savings. I mean, obviously, you want to borrow as little as you can. I mean, it's possible sometimes to just get a loan for like a huge amount. They say like, oh, you have this financial aid, whatever's left over, you can just borrow that whole amount. And for some families or for some students, it's tempting to do that. It's like, oh, great, it's there. But obviously, you have to pay interest on that. So the advice I would give you is borrow as little as possible, so anything you can save is going to help with that, including students working over the summer. Like, how much can you save to help pay the bill? Or how much can you save so that those expenses that come along throughout the school year, you don't have to worry about those, or you worry less about them. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about loans because a lot of people get them. The best loans to get are these federal loans. So the way it works is you fill out the FAFSA that determines eligibility for these federal loans. So if you think, we're not going to be eligible for anything, we just are going to have to borrow, fill out the FAFSA. That's how you get these federal student loans. Student fills it out. The school itself, the college, will say, oh, you've applied for admission. You applied for financial aid. You are eligible for this loan. And you can see there are caps on this. So a first-year student who's a dependent student and their parents' information is involved, $5,500 is the most they can get in the first year. So the idea is this cap is on here so students can't borrow too much, but they're the best deal. So usually they have the best benefits. Sometimes you don't have to pay interest while you're in school. Payments aren't required while students in school. Definitely the place to start. You have a question? Right, so the question is it cumulative? So like, could you borrow this $5,500 plus $6,500 in the sophomore year? If you didn't take it the first year, you can't. It's during that year, that's the max you can get. But the total amount is this. So a student may take more than 4 years. They can borrow, up to these cumulative maximums. So this $27,000, that's the most a student can borrow total. So if you didn't get a loan in your first year, maybe you could in your 5th year if you are taking longer to finish school. So again, start with these if you're going to borrow at all because they have the best benefits. So there are other options though. So you can see this here, this direct loan and then VSAC loans. We put some interest rates up there just so you can kind of get a sense. This loan is a loan, the VSAC one that is in a student's name. There may be other loans that are out there. So put that out there because we do, through VSAC, have loans for families, try to make them the best deal possible. But if you can get a better deal, shop around and see what you can find, obviously. So the federal loans, you can see the interest rates are pretty similar. These change every year on July 1st, the interest rates. So this is for now, just to give you a sense, but it will change. And then parent loans, again, there are federal ones and there are private ones available. So this one's a little bit more tricky because typically the interest rates on the federal loans, at least recently, have been higher. So you may say, well, I don't want to go with the federal loan because the interest rate's higher, but those loans often have more benefits. So for example, if you get a federal loan as a parent and then you die, that loan will go away. No one is going to take that on. So not the best benefit, but it is a benefit. You may be able to defer payments if you lose your job, for example. So there's some benefits that go along there that may not be available for private loans, but the private loans may have other benefits. So that's why it's important to really compare. With this parent loan, some schools, what they do is they'll say, oh, you have this full amount, you got this aid left, and they will say, you can get a plus loan for everything that's left over. That's the maximum you can get. So maybe you say, well, that's great, but we don't want that whole amount. You can always take less. It's the same thing with federal student loans. A school offers a student $5,500. You say, well, we only need $3,000. And you can just take that amount. So you don't have to take the full amount. Okay. What's our end time? 3 minutes ago. So some calculators to use. Again, there's the net price calculator you want to use. College Board has some of those. They have this EFC calculator. They still call it that, even though we're changing it from ESC. The Federal Student Aid Estimator is kind of like a mini FAFSA. So you can plug in some information. It doesn't ask all the questions, but it might give you some idea of if you're eligible for federal aid. And then the Mapping Your Future site has some good calculators on there. For example, you can plug in like, how much would my loan payments be if I were to borrow this much over time and so on. So helpful to have these calculators as you're planning and thinking about like, well, if we had to borrow for 4 years, what would that look like? If we only borrowed the first year, what would that look like? Things like that. All right, so a couple more things to be thinking about before we wrap up here. So some steps for junior year. Again, I won't go through all these. These checklists are available online if you're here today. These are also on the table in the back. So some things to be doing for juniors, but mostly it's about research, thinking about where you might want to apply, looking at net price, kind of doing that planning ahead when it comes to paying for it. One other thing, and you may not see this if you're online, this is available as a PDF online. This is the VSAC scholarship booklet. So this is something you can look at now. This is expired because every year there's a deadline in the spring for scholarships you can apply through VSAC. But the booklet that we have, if you're online, you can get it as a PDF, but you also may get it in your school counseling office. It might be available there. But this is something you can do too now because you can look through, and a lot of them are going to be the same. Sometimes we add new ones, but you can get a good sense for scholarships there. And then for senior year, that's when you're actually applying for financial aid. Get your FSA ID, your FSA account. You can create a My VSAC account. You want to gather any financial information that might have to be reported. So that's something you want to put together when you go to apply. And then obviously you're going to actually apply for financial aid during senior year. That's when that happens. Whew, that's a lot of talking here. Some of the stuff I've been talking about are all available on our website. So if you go to this site, vsac.org, pay resources, that's one. And then stuff we've been talking about today, either if you don't pick it up, it's all on our CCP website, the College and Career Pathways. But a couple of good ones. This is helpful, this Paying for College guide. We print this one and it's online. And we have a loan guide as well, which might be helpful as you're looking at loans. So again, like if you're early in the process, you know, this is a lot of information I'm just throwing out there about this whole process, but you can get more information as you go. It's all going to be available to you, and VSAC can help you out. So actually, here's a sense of like how we're helping this year. So, you know, you can make an appointment to talk to somebody, say like, I have questions about filling out my FAFSA, or I'd like somebody to kind of walk me through the process a little bit. Those are some of the things that we can help you do. And there's also Federal Student Aid has like a chat line and a phone number, and they've been really good about connecting with folks who are filling out the FAFSA. So there is help available to get this stuff done. And then, of course, financial aid offices are good about helping as well. Okay. That's a lot. Key thing to leave you with is there are several forms to fill out. Do those senior year. You can make changes if you need to. Let schools and VSAC know about special circumstances. And the bottom line is, this is all very doable. Like, it sounds like there's a lot of stuff to think about, a lot of stuff to do, but all of this is doable, and it's worth just going through the process because, again, college is expensive. You want to apply for everything and get as much financial aid as possible. So lots of people have done it, and if you're doing it for the first time, it's very possible. All right, so we might have time for a couple of questions. Are we done at?
The next workshop starts at 4:15.
4:15, okay.
So yeah, ask questions if you want or go.
All right, maybe a couple questions if anybody has them. All right, no questions, that's perfect. I did a great job. All right, so thanks for coming, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.